The Wes Penre Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The Second Level of Learning. http://wespenre.com. Genesis Paper Number 7, The Atlanteans and the Misuse of Energy by Wes Penre, Sunday, September 9, 2012, http://wespenre.com. 1. Abstract. Not only archaeologists, but even locals around the world have found skulls, bones and relatively intact skeletons of strange beings, giants and dwarfs that should simply not exist, according to scientists. Still they do. Some of these findings, to make matters worse, should especially not exist in the part of the world where they were found. Still they do. Not only one or two of them, but sometimes whole graveyards, like in Peru. There have been many cataclysms in Earth's history, and many different species were genetically engineered, manipulated and abandoned. Some of them, once they didn't get any support from their creator gods anymore, moved underground into inaccessible areas of the world, like jungles, remote areas and up in the mountains, and many of them still live there. If people only knew how many different species are dwelling in Earth's interior, they would be stunned, and some of them look very different from us. In theory, I could have summarized what I wanted to say in maybe 50 instead of 1,000 plus pages, level IN2, but it's very important that we know our true past, including how we've been, and certainly still are, manipulated, so we can understand present time and make good decisions for our future. We can't understand the present alien agendas if we don't understand our true past, leading up to our current situation, which has everything to do with alien agendas. This is why history is so important, and also one of the most altered subjects in school. The manipulators know that if we know next to nothing about our origins, it's a piece of cake to control us. Therefore, if they give us amnesia between lives and alter our history, they can do almost anything to us. It was in Atlantis things started going extremely wrong with the Syrian experiment. To understand what really happened, we need to understand the legend of Atlantis and what really occurred there. There is a lot of karma involved when it comes to the Atlantean era, and this is why people still aren't able to let go of that time period. The new Atlantis has been planned for a long time, and in recorded history we know that those plans and dreams were common in the work of such prominent people as Sir Francis Bacon, who was a high initiate in the Rosicrucian order. Freemasonry in general have promoted these plans as well, and Atlantean symbolism is found everywhere in this particular secret society. The founding fathers of the United States were those who were chosen to implement this dream in America, and many of them were either Freemasons, or in other ways closely connected to them. In many ways history is repeating itself now as we are approaching the end of 2012 and beyond, so that our karma can be played out and hopefully resolved. However, it's up to us if it will, or if we are going to build up additional negative energies. If we let history repeat itself because of ignorance, we're going to end up with a new catastrophe, this time even bigger than the last one, because now our very souls are at stake, literally so. We think that nuclear power and weapons of mass destruction is something new, but remnants of ancient nuclear wars can be found in many places around their world. Even in Scotland, the British Islands were the northeastern part of Atlantis, which remained above sea level after the deluge. Why are so many abductions being reported? What is it in our DNA that they want? Did the genetic upgrade of mankind ever stop, or is it still going on in places like Area 51 and off-planet? These are all important questions which we shall discuss over the duration of these remaining papers of the second level of learning. And Atlantis is the key. It's important to realize that just like with the Lemurian civilization, Atlantis wasn't restricted to a continent in the Atlantic Ocean, but was more of an era than a location. To me, Atlantis was the part of the population which eventually chose technology before spirituality and nature, while Mu was the opposite. The similarities between Atlantis and Mu in today's world are sometimes stunning. We have to make the same decisions today as people did back then, but hopefully this time we stand a better chance to maintain and build on the positive energies many of us have worked hard on building up within ourselves. This time we have a few advantages we didn't have then. One of them is the numbers, 7 billion people, and the other the intense gamma rays bombardment from the Sun and the galactic center. The deluge happened approximately half of a full year ago, 13,500 years ago, and now we are completing a full year, a full circle around the zodiac. Although the energies were strong at the Atlantean time as well, they are much stronger now. This doesn't prevent those who want to destroy us to do so if we let them, so again, it's up to us. 2. Atlantis and the Orion heritage. There is a lot of confusion over whom was in charge in Atlantis. Some say it was the Sirians, the Pleiadians say the karma they are working on when being in touch with us humans in present time originates from Atlantis, and others say Orion ruled in Atlantis. So, who is correct? As strange as it may sound, it was all of the above. The island of Atlantis had been sparsely populated already long before the focus of our story, but not in the sense it was about to become. When Ea Degree decided to let the tribes split up, and many of them went eastward and ended up in Mu, Ea and a lot of enhanced humans, with the fire of the goddess, were heading westward and settled down on the Atlantic island where they eventually built cities of the special structure we are so used to see in pictures from that era. Later city constructions, such as Babylon, were built with similar architecture in mind. Ea picked out his 10 favorite human hybrids and let them become kings over 10 different kingdoms, roughly spread out over the island area. Contrary to the Lemurians, who were left without an alien commander, the Atlanteans were ruled by kings, not by queens or shamans. They shamans, however, were instructed to build their own priesthoods, more correctly, priestesshoods, where they could dedicate themselves to shamanism. In Atlantis, Ea later became known as Poseidon, in Greece, and Neptune, in Rome. The Syrians drew lots, and Ea was given the big island to rule as a king. This was his domain, and he was the first and last king of kings of Atlantis. According to Plato's story, Poseidon, Ea, took an additional wife, Cleito, who was a mortal human female. She bore him 5 sets of twins, whereof Atlas was the oldest and most powerful. The term Atlantis comes from the name Atlas. Poseidon promised Cleito to make Atlantis a royal paradise one. So he built a city by the ocean and put a temple in the middle of the city. In addition, the legend goes, Poseidon cast down a gift from heaven, a huge, beautiful crystal that he gave to the people. The people, because this crystal came from God, worshipped it, and it gave them longevity. I believe it did, but not in the way the legend tells us. The genetic engineering team used crystals and quartz in huge quantities when they created and manipulated life forms in their laboratories, and there were certainly labs in Atlantis. Still, Poseidon did give mankind longevity. In fact, he gave them longer lives than humans had ever had and would ever get up until our present day. They became semi-gods after had eaten both from the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Plato said that according to the Egyptians, the northern parts of the Atlantean island consisted mostly of mountains, and so did the northern shorelines. In the south there was a great plain of an oblong shape. On the central island, where the main city and a palace were built, Poseidon and his human wife were to reside. Atlas, the eldest son, became king of the region around today's Atlas Mountains in the east, today's North and Northwestern Africa, where he was born. His other sons were all to rule over many men in a large territory. Poseidon carved the mountain where his love dwelt into a palace and enclosed it with 3 circular moats of increasing width, varying from 1 to 3 stadia and separated by rings of land proportional in size. The Atlanteans then built bridges northward from the mountain, making a route to the rest of the island. They dug a great canal to the sea, and alongside the bridges carved tunnels into the rings of rock so that ships could pass into the city around the mountain. They carved docks from the rock walls of the moats. Every passage to the city was guarded by gates and towers, and a wall surrounded each of the city's rings. The walls were constructed of red, white, and black rock quarried from the moats, and were covered with brass, tin, and the precious metal orichalcum, respectively. So it seems Poseidon chose to build his palace in a mountain, apparently not foreign to Syrians, whose culture Ea had adopted a lot of, and the city was created around it with canals extending to the ocean, which was Poseidon's true element. Today we hear quite a lot about UFOs being seen ascending from water, either big lakes or from the ocean. This makes a lot of sense, because there are many extraterrestrial bases under the ocean floor, protected and secure from snooping eyes. It seems like Poseidon rather quickly adopted to the patriarchal rule, choosing males to rule the 10 kingdoms of Atlantis rather than females. The story goes that at one point the firstborn within the ruling elite, those with the purest Aryan bloodline, was a female, and she was actually supposed to inherit the throne in one of the kingdoms. However, before she got the chance, her parents gave birth to a male baby, who then automatically became the successor of the throne. So, in spite of being Aryan and born from the Queen of the Stars, Ea/Enki/Poseidon had become a true Syrian in nature in more than one ways. Poseidon was very strict with keeping the Aryan/Namlu bloodline as intact as possible when came to the ruling elite. Only the offspring of his own 10 hybrid sons were to rule in Atlantis. Poseidon himself intentionally took a human wife of the Aryan/Lu bloodline and created a hybrid, mostly Aryan blood, and the rest with a lot of Lu DNA and a little bit of Syrian. But it was the dominant Aryan blood, which ran through the veins of the manipulated, shorter Neanderthals, who had the most powerful fire of all the humans in the Atlantean kingdoms. So his sons, who were the first-generation super-enhanced humans, enhanced Project Elohim, having much more Aryan blood, then took spouses amongst the most capable of the existing human hybrids. This way, Poseidon was hoping he could eventually achieve his goal to create a global event in the far future, where he and his Syrian allies could feed off the Khaa energy from all enhanced humans in the world and use this to gain power in the Khaa realm, the universe of the Mother Goddess. This is also why Poseidon, the god of the ocean, spent so much of his time under the ocean floor. He continued his genetic experiments there. Many researchers has it correct and dedicate Atlantis to the reptilian, Aryan bloodline, but without understanding the dynamics behind it all. It gets confusing for most people who try to research this as long as they don't realize that Ea was not a Syrian, but born in Orion, and therefore an Aryan. They see references to the Aryan reptilian bloodline when they trace this back, and accuse the whole Orion Empire for something one Aryan did, namely Prince Ea. There were other Aryans involved, such as Enlil's consort, Ninlil, but Ea was the one being from Orion who did all the work which eventually led up to the scenario we are facing today. Other than that, researchers like David Icke has found correct information but makes the same mistake as everybody else. I still think he has done a lot of good research on our human past, and in many cases is right on target. Here he makes the connection between Atlantis and Orion. The Minoan civilization on Crete, part of the Sumer Empire, was another serpent bull culture. They called its line of Aryan-kings the sons of the serpent goddess because, once again, the Aryan line is the purest of the reptilian hybrids. These were the serpent kings who ruled Atlantis and the later Sumer Empire. Ancient Crete, as with other connected centers, was famous for its labyrinth, a word meaning house of the double axe or house of the serpent goddess. Emphasis is Wes. So here Icke is telling us the same thing. The Aryan bloodline is the purest of the reptilian hybrids, humans. The reptilians in this case are those who adapted the matriarch, which is the serpent kundalini, the female energy. Icke is basically repeating what Ea himself thought, and how he wanted humans to evolve. Enlil and his Syrian overlords didn't mind that Project Elohim consisted of mainly Aryan blood as long as they could create the effect that was necessary for the Syrians to take advantage of it. The planet Venus was apparently of importance both to the Atlanteans and the Lemurians when the matriarchs built temples. Rev. Dr. Robert Ghost Wolf writes, "It is interesting to note that wherever these Qumara priest kings, priests of the dragon lords born of Lemurian and Atlantean cultures, they built temples aligned with our sister planet Venus, the bright and morning star, and the planet itself became associated with saviors and the immortals. Ea is considered being Lucifer by many, including this author, in the Bible referred to as the morning star, another name for Venus. Does Venus have anything to do with Sirian plans, involving us in our future ascension? Some organizations who are working behind the scenes today say that indeed it does, and that humankind will find out about it on a broader scale before the end of the year 2012. The Sirians are allegedly involved in this supposed event, which is said to be just around the corner. We will see. If there is any substance to it, I will announce it on my blog. Venus also plays a leading spiritual role in many North and South American Indian cultures, interestingly enough, something Dr. Ghost Wolf also emphasizes. 3. Elitism in Atlantis. EA, after had announced the 10 kings to rule over 10 districts of Atlantis, formed a governing council, which I here will call the Royal Governing Council of Atlantis, the RGCA for short. These kings worked under the pretense that they were of the divine and therefore had the divine right to rule over others. Under them were the shamans and their high priests and priestesses, which I here will call the Lesser Council. Thus, Poseidon, in contrast to his Aryan heritage, had now created elitism amongst humans in standard Sirian style. This was not done by accident. Remember, I have said many times that the gods have long thoughts, a term which I've borrowed from Lissa Royal and Keith Priest and their book, The Prisms of Lyra, and it's an excellent term to describe the alien mind. They don't die like we do, so therefore they often plan a long time into the future, sometimes thousands of years. EA knew that one day he and the Sirians may have to return to the stars, and while they are gone, they wanted a ruling class of human hybrids left here on Earth to rule over the less fortunate. However, what it seems is that they never really left, except for a few hundred years in the beginning of the Common Era. Other than that, many of them left, but a skeleton crew remained here on Earth, some embodied and some in spirit, and continued ruling humans behind the scenes, often interdimensionally, and used the hybrids, today's global elite, to execute their plans. Most people think that the global elite was created by the Sirians, or the Anunnaki if we talk Sitchin language, but it was not. In fact, EA was the one who came up with the idea, and this governing system is applied still today. We call it autocracy when a country or region is ruled by one person, such as a king or a president, although we also know that there are always those of secret powers who rule behind the scenes, so-called shadow governments, and behind them, interdimensional powers pull the strings. Interestingly enough, perhaps 12 years ago there was a picture circling around on the internet, a picture I believe originated from one of Fritz Springmeier's books. It showed Hillary Clinton being healed by an alleged native Indian shaman. People were very upset over that picture, because they saw that the President of the United States, in this case Bill Clinton, and his wife were caught up in shamanism. This, however, is a rule rather than an exception, but what is remarkable about that picture is that the global elite still hold on to a similar structure they did in Atlantis, where the RGCA had access to shamans at all times. 4. Atlantean Shamanism. In the early days of Atlantis, although he had quite a patriarchal mindset, EA endorsed shamanism for all the reasons we've discussed earlier. Therefore, the humans who had the fire of the goddess inside of them were free to practice the matriarchal religion, not understanding that when they succeeded, Sirians in the astral tuned into their vibration and gained their own power from the efforts of the humans. Shamanism quite soon also turned into worship rather than just religious practice and rituals, based upon a connection with the goddess universe. Not even the selected kings, Poseidon's sons with the human female, Cleito, knew everything about the plans of EA and the Sirian overlords. They were still hybrids and of lower rank than the full-blooded extraterrestrials. They did not know how to extract the energies of the 96% from the female shamans. And Poseidon, when he had set up his Atlantean empire, was rarely seen above ground, spending most of his time under the ocean floor where he had his genetic laboratories. When EA was gone, some of the kings who were curious and jealous of the shamanic powers some females had, wanted to know how to gain those same powers. Also, they felt threatened by the shamans as well. If they had that much power, who said they couldn't overthrow their king? Yes, the kings could use the shamans for certain things like healing, blessing an area etc., but no real power came back to them. So some kings started kidnapping women of fire to find out from where they got all these mysterious abilities. Was there an unknown god somewhere who gave them the power? The kings started asking the women who possessed the fire how they did what they did, but when the shamans couldn't really explain it in other terms than that they just had the ability, the kings got frustrated and started torturing the shamans in hope for them to tell the truth. When the women still couldn't tell them, the kings and their soldiers started raping them. This became ongoing when they heard rumors that men could gain some powers from having intercourse with a woman and take in the energies when the female had her orgasm. When rape didn't do it, hardly any women had orgasms during rape. The patriarchal kings used other tactics. They rewarded women of fire who had great results from their shamanism and had them move into the king's castle. They made it a privilege to have sex with the king, and by manipulating the women in this fashion, some believed this to be an honor, and they were dressed up to have sex with the ruler. After a while, the kings who practiced this kind of manipulation soon had collected their own harems, from where they could pick and choose whom to have sex with. They found that with practice, the kings could actually tune into the 96% for the short moment the female had an orgasm, and that energy built up in their bodies for a while, but they were not able to sustain it, which frustrated them. After a while, some female shamans were tortured and raped to death or used in black magic rituals of a kind that is still practiced today amongst the global elite. They induced fear and terror in the victim, and when the female was on the height of terror, they killed her and drank her blood. This, they noticed, gave them huge power rushes and they got access to realms they otherwise could not reach. After had practiced this kind of human sacrifice for a while, they took it a bit further. They started raping young girls who still had not reached puberty. The same thing was done to these young girls. When they vibrated on the highest terror level, they were killed, and the perpetrators drank their blood, getting an additional kick from the adrenaline rush of the victim. The late Sir Lawrence Gardner said that the ones who were set up to rule for the Anunnaki, Syrians, as kings, presidents, dictators, or whatnot, drank menstrual blood called star fire, but never mentioned that they still do the same thing today. This was discussed in one of David Icke's books **. It's interesting, however, that Gardner, who had an incredible insider knowledge, used the word star fire, which is exactly what it is. When they practiced their rituals and drank the menstrual blood, and blood in general, from the women and men of fire, they drank the blood of the goddess. Gaining the power they did by practicing this, the kings felt they were strong enough to expand their kingdom. Thus, wars broke out between regions, or countries, in a fight over real estate. Whether Poseidon did something about this or not is unknown to me, but wars were common in Atlantis, so either he was not able to stop them, or he didn't bother. Neither did he bother when the lesser councils started standing up against the kings, rebelling over how they were treated, and even killed. Maybe this was a part of the experiment, to see how it would all develop on its own and from there make further adjustments in the human programming. This is probably how he thought, for he made a lot of adjustments, working hard in his laboratories underseas. Every now and then he came to the surface in his saucer-shaped craft and landed outside his palace, or hovered over the land. People recognized it because it was distinct from the Syrian ships which they used in the atmosphere and when traveling across the solar system. The Syrian craft looked more like super-modern airplanes, but used zero-point energy and could stand still in the air, just like EA's ships could. When Ninhursag joined him in his laboratories, there was some serious genetic work going on. Although many wars eventually subsided and diminished to mere conflicts with sudden outbreaks, the kings and the males in general who tried to understand feminine power, never gave up in their attempts to gain the power and wisdom many women were born with. Life, however, went on, and the female shamans continued reigning as the masters in some ways of looking at it. In public, the priestesses dressed in robes of white linen. They were grand experts in plants and medical potions. It is clear that Poseidon wanted a patriarchal regime, but to let the females do their own thing to develop what they all needed for future purposes. There were Syrians, however, who settled down in certain parts of Atlantis as well, and they were always eager to suck the life energy out of the females, and dark rituals were often the game for the day. However, knowing the power of the universe, they also chose special days and went to special sacred places to perform their horrific rituals, and they and their hybrid offspring, today's elite, are doing the same thing in present time. 5. Atlantean Technology. Contrary to Mu, the kings of Atlantis learned both Aryan and Syrian technology and soon built more sophisticated cities and aircraft to fly between places. These machines were not allowed, or designed to leave the Earth's atmosphere, for they couldn't penetrate the grid. Only certain hand-picked people had the clearance to leave Earth and travel through the solar system. Sometimes they needed miners on one of the other planets in the solar system, and these slave workers had to have certain clearance to become part of the solar mission. This was nothing anyone applied for, who would, but solar officers of the Solar Command chose from the population the strongest and healthiest males, who could accomplish the task. You could see hundreds of people leaving in big space hangars and disappear up into the skies. The Syrians who had chosen them had no mercy and didn't distinguish between those who had family and those who didn't. Often enough, the family members never saw their father, brother, or spouse again, as most of them were worked to death, as usual. There was also a genetically engineered species of worker ants, whom we call the Greys, who were created in the Vega solar system, back-engineered here in Eridu, and particularly programmed to be worker ants for the Syrian overlords. They are still working closely together with them up until this very day, and when we see Greys, the Syrians are not far away. The space uniform the human workers wore were dark blue and had the winged sun disk tattooed on the sleeve. In many ways, the Atlantean technology superseded the technology we have today, but we are not too far behind. It is concerning that we are going in the same direction as the Atlanteans did. Unbeknownst to most humans, we have the technology to travel across the solar system, but just like in ancient time, humans in general are not allowed to use this technology. Again, only hand-picked elite are allowed to penetrate the grid, but together with Syrians only. The Atlantean computer systems were in certain terms more sophisticated than ours today, but just like us, they were using crystals to store computer memory. We used quartz crystal to store computer memory back in the 1940s, but the Atlanteans had a more brilliant system when using crystals. They had the ability to tune into the resonance of Earth's natural crystal forests, deep down under the surface of the planet, and could thus store as much memory as they wanted. The difference between then and now is that in Atlantis, only a chosen few had access to the computer network. Computers were not for everyday man. Just like in Mu, the shamanic priestesses could communicate with the animals and spent a lot of time especially with dolphins and whales. These highly intelligent animals were more than eager to help humans with whatever they needed, and they were often used both as couriers of physical material between land and those who lived under the surface of the ocean, but also for special telepathic messages. The shamans and many people of fire had developed telepathic and remote viewing abilities, and were using those to help people. The predecessors of the modern tarot cards were used to make things look more sophisticated, the same thing with the crystal ball. None of this was needed, but those who didn't have access to the power of the 96% appreciated when they could relate to something physical, like a crystal ball or a deck of cards, when the Atlantean priesthood used their psychic abilities. It made it more real to them. If the Atlantean technologies, handed over to the human hybrids of power, had been limited to computers and the like, it probably wouldn't have been so bad, but they were also introduced to weaponry of different kinds. Gone were the days when they used arrows and bows and swords to defend themselves. These kingdoms had access to laser weapons and nuclear power like we have in today's world. Although nuclear weapons weren't used to begin with, it created additional tension between the nations to know that the neighbor had them. Who had the most sophisticated weapons of mass destruction? This induced fear.